Good morning, everyone. How are we all doing this morning? I have a really exciting guest that has actually tuned in all the way from the States, Jim Frawley. Super excited to have you here. Just a little bit about Jim Frawley if you don't know who he is. So Jim Frawley, he owns a business called Bellwether, and he's a strategic consultant for organizations and needing an end-to-end partner to combat fast evolving economy. And he talks about this a lot in his book, and it's all around adapting and change management, which is really prevalent right now. And I think not even just now, if you do coaching, it is all around change management and how we manage ourselves and the environment around us when we look at change. And he really looks at organizational design, talent planning, and business management. He's an executive coach and he works with leaders to accelerate their career into the C-suite. So he has really that corporate top level experience behind him. He's 20 years experience, so he really understands those pain points within that executive area and field. And he's a lot of understanding around people and processes and how that works. And he's a leadership speaker as well, so he does a lot of talks around this. He has his own podcast as well. Check it out. I was listening to these great hints and tips. If you are working with teams, great bite-sized information there to really take away in nuggets that you can use in everyday managing in the workplace. I'm really excited to talk to him today. We're going to really talk around psychological safety in the workplace, culture in the workplace, and how we really adapt, I suppose, when things are up against us. And before we went live, we were talking a little bit around the Great Resignation and how to retain talent and people within the workplace. So super excited to have you on, Jim.
I'm excited to be here. I'm going to save this introduction because it's very, very good. I love it.
Thank you so much. So thoughts, I suppose, around, obviously you're in the States. It's still a global thing at the moment. I'm based here in Ireland, and you know, we have an issue at the moment in retail and hospitality across the board with really retaining staff and keeping them engaged and in the workplace. And a lot of them are leaving right now. I suppose, what is your thoughts around there? What do you think that that organizations can do to retain their staff?
It's a loaded question. There's a lot you can do, but it's, I feel that if you're struggling to keep people now, whatever you're doing is almost too little, too late. The people who have decided to leave a long time ago. And now they're taking a paycheck because it's difficult to find people. There's a lot of money out there in the marketplace to find really, really good people. The challenge organizations are going to have is the best people are getting those higher paychecks somewhere else. So those are the people that are leaving, and those are the people you don't want to leave. So first and foremost, when I speak to organizations about retention and keeping the right kind of people in place, is engaging them in discussion on what it is exactly that they want to do. So we're trying to fit the square peg into a round hole, dictate what it is that people want. Oh, people want this. People want to stay at home. People want to get paid more. People want, you know, all of these things. But everybody's motivated by something different. And so engaging and starting the conversation and completely rethinking the way that we're thinking about our people, that's ultimately where we need to get. Why do you have people working there? What are you doing to measure their success? What's the path that they're going to be on? And how do you give them the skill set to dictate it themselves? People ultimately want control. They want two things, really. They want control over their career. They don't know how to get it, but they also want to feel like the organization has their back. And so engaging them in that discussion and making them feel like they're heard and recognizing that they're heard is that's what they're really looking for. I know plenty of people who are staying in jobs for less money because the organization has their back and they feel like they're in a really, really good place with their company. They get the flexibility they want. They've got families at home. They're comfortable with where they are. And so they have the environment in place that they actually want to stay
in. Really interesting. So taken from that, it's about creating an environment really that inhibits people to have that autonomy almost to have a little bit of input into that. I've worked with a lot of organizations, and what can happen sometimes is we have marketing, we've HR, and they all work in silos, and we implement things like, you know, behavioral values from a HR piece or whatever that might be. And you know, they're really good, they sound amazing, but they get stuck in that area. And then we might do a project in marketing around it, or there might be real buzz for the first couple of weeks, but it just really loses momentum. How does companies keep that going, I suppose? Because for me, it was always the top down, really, because the guys on the front line that are trying to implement that, they can only do so much with the resources that they have, Jim. And I used to find even, we would get it from above us, and we'd be like, right, okay, well, it sounds amazing, but like, how does it affect me and everyone else on a day-to-day basis? You know what I mean? Like, these are great things to have, but like, I suppose, and part of me kind of thinks sometimes, is it just the buzzwords that's really getting people, how is it really applicable? Looking at scenarios for me personally, right? How does it fit in to the day-to-day running of the business? We want people to be authentic. We're throwing around these words like authentic leadership, it's great in theory, but like, what does that mean? It means something it means different to different people. It's a different meaning and holding, I think, a little bit. And I think sometimes we forget that. We look at it like a blanket approach. This is it, we lose that individualist approach to certain things with people. I think we nearly look at everyone as the same. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's where most of these programs really fail.
Yeah.
When you sit at organizations and you take a look at the people creating these programs, there's this weird dynamic of, we have to pitch and sell management, who's very philosophical and theory based on what it is we want to do. But it falls down in, how is this actually going to be applicable in the workplace? I make jokes about, a lot of coaches who come in, they know all about the theory, but they've never worked in an office. And so, it's not going to work. And so it's great. And you could do this kind of talk in circles, and we're going to talk about resiliency, and we're going to talk about authenticity, and we're going to talk about all these different things. But at the end of the day, when I'm sitting here crunching on my computer or working with a client or whatever it is, that's irrelevant to whatever it is that I need to get done today. And what we need to do, and the challenge with profiling people and giving personality assessments, and it's all the same, is we don't go far enough.
Yeah.
And we could tell them what we're hoping to do from an organizational perspective and why it's beneficial from the organizational perspective. But we need to teach people how to internalize that and say, this is how it's beneficial for me. When I was in corporate, 15, 20 years in corporate, I was so frustrated with exactly that. I hated, it was just almost false promises, ridiculous kind of theory things. I began to resent it. And everybody sitting around the water coolers talking about the same thing. Like, here we go again, another one of these buzzwords. What I didn't realize until after I had left was that it was really good. I just didn't know how to use it. I didn't know how to make it my own, right? I would love to be resilient. I would love to be authentic, but I didn't know how to internalize it and take it that step further so that it was actually tangible for me. And so that's a major task to do, especially the larger the organization, because there's filters. And is the manager that you have capable of teaching you how to do that? And what are the resources? And how do you teach people to find what it is that they need so that they can learn to be really dynamic and resilient and authentic, and whatever the word is that you want to do? Because that's where it's going to be tangible, is when an individual can actually make those words real for themselves.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you said there around it being tangible to you as an individual. And I think that whole piece of selling, that new program, that new project, that new thing to the management team, and it's all philosophical and it's all great in theory. I've seen that, and I've been there where, you're being told that this is the best thing. And, and I used to have people come to me on the same level as me. They'd go, Louise, this is absolutely bananas. This isn't going to work. Like, where do you think we're going to have the time? Like, do we have to close the door of the store and literally implement all of this? Like, how can we do that with the workload we have? It's totally unrealistic. So I would always say, okay, right, we don't want to be a negative Nancy, okay? Because if you ever say that to the person above you, they go straight away, oh my God, you're putting it down, but you haven't even tried it yet. So I'll go, okay, let's try it. Let's give them a bit of feedback. And look, it's not working for X, Y, and Z. I've tried it for this many weeks, whatever it might be. But at the same time, I used to always not wonder, right, why don't they get the people that are actually implementing it at the bottom level involved in the process? And I still see it there, that gap. And I'm like, why in the name of God are we still in a place where we have these people who aren't actually implementing it, making this and not getting those people involved in it? And the companies that do really well are the ones that actually get people involved in that process, because they go, right, let's test it out at the bottom, see how that trickles up and what that actually looks like. Instead, they've seen this, this really, could be example what you said there, resilience training, whatever that might be, authentic leadership. They put people on these training programs, they go off site for a few days, they get everyone super excited about it, everyone comes back going, yeah, I've learned something. But then what we haven't really looked at is, we haven't looked at giving them the time to implement it, and we haven't given them strategies around implemented it. We've given them the theory of it. So now I'm back in my desk again, or back in my shop floor again as a manager, and I'm going, right, they've told me all this great stuff, but now I'm dealing with the day-to-day problems they're coming up against, fast and heavy, and all of that now has gotten parked. And within a few weeks, that information is lost and it's gone, and I've done absolutely nothing with it. I feel frustrated because I actually really liked the ideas, but I now haven't had the opportunity to implement them. And now we're back to square one again, and we're going to do another management program in a year's time again with the same stuff but packaged differently. Right. It's like a hamster wheel.
It is, and it goes on and on and on, and everybody gets frustrated. When we structure these, you're absolutely right with co-creating whatever the program is. And if you want the reason any change management program fails, the reason these training programs fail is people reject it, whether they don't like the change or they're just not capable of making the change. They don't have the resources to do it. Most of my engagements, we'll sit there, we'll do the workshop. It has to be experiential. Everybody has to put their personal stamp on it. It can't just be a presentation from a managerial standpoint, but there has to be a follow-up. And the follow-up has to be, what changes have you implemented? Maybe a month later, maybe 2 months later, what changes have you implemented? We're testing behaviors. Did it work? Did it not? What's working for this person? What's working for that person? And engaging that conversation so that they can continue to grow it over time, so that the next year when you're doing the management training, coaching, whatever workshop you're doing, it's building upon the previous year. And it's almost this ongoing business case that you're watching and aware of the evolution of the business that everybody's involved in.
Do you think organizations when they're doing these trainings, when they're doing this, they put a focus more on the change and the outcomes of the change? Do you think that they're missing that a lot of the time?
Well, a lot of times, if we're talking about change management, too often the focus is on the change that has to happen. Right. And it's externally focused. What change is happening to the organization and what change is happening to the individual, and we're focused externally. And the way to deal with macro change is to focus on the micro individual and what resources do they have to respond to that particular change that they need to do. So if an organization is trying to say, we want to reorg the group and we're going to change this process and we're going to do X, Y, Z, all of this comes down to each component link in that chain. How are they going to be able to internalize this, make their impact, and implement it that way? So any macro change has to follow and focus on the individual and how they're actually able to be internalizing it and implementing it and focusing on it that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me personally, and just, I suppose, to give an example, I worked in an organization before, and I worked with someone that was in that organization for a very long time. And I came in new to that business and I had all these ideas and I was super excited. I was going to change everything. But that person above me really didn't want any change. They wanted things left the way they were because they were in that organization for 15 plus years. This is the way they'd done it. And it's quite hard, I think, if you have the next line above you. So even if you have someone at a certain level that's open to that change, it's adaptable. And if you have someone above them that doesn't want that change, that resistance can be quite hard to understand and to actually implement.
That's right. Yeah. And it's, I could name a lot of people from my time in corporate that it was so difficult and impossible to do and so frustrating that I eventually just left the organization, because it wasn't going to change. Nobody above that person even cared about it. And we forget, especially with the pandemic, most people, their view into the culture of the organization, the change of the organization, the view of the organization, and what we're desiring to change, there is a very narrow filter, and it's that person's manager. It's their one view into the organization. And so when we're all working from home, or we're all working from wherever, retail's a little different, but everything goes through that one individual. That is a major clog point for the organization and what it is that you're looking to do. So it's not just giving an individual the ability to figure it out for themselves. We have to also go one level above and say, give the managers the tools, because many of them don't know how to implement change. Many of them don't know how to have difficult conversations. Many of them don't have time to have the difficult conversations. So how do we teach them to do, from a time management perspective and a coaching perspective, teach them that they should be coaching each individual? What does leadership and management actually mean to the organization? When we're building learning and development programs now, they're so, and I lift under the hood and we take a look at what's there. This stuff was written back in like 1990. It's 30 years old. It was like old Jack Welch kind of ridiculous ideas and everything that we're trying to teach from a coaching and management perspective. And we know now that it's completely outdated and it doesn't work. And so we have to completely revisit and take a look at what are the breakpoints and what do we need to find in order to get what it is that we want out of the organization. Yeah, it's individual self-efficacy and teaching people how to see the bigger view versus the small view. But then also, how do you teach people? It's as simple as, how do you have a difficult conversation? How do you ask people for the feedback that you actually want? One of the biggest complaints I get from individual clients is, I'm not getting the feedback that I need in order to get better. So, well, what are you doing to get that feedback? Because if you're going to sit and wait for somebody else, you're never going to get it. So how are we teaching these people to figure out the steps that they need to take in order to get what they need to push whatever agenda needs to be pushed? There's a combination of personal capability and the business ideal that we're trying to promote. And most people aren't able to pair those two. That's what I like to do, is the personal capability and the business ideal. And how do we mesh those two together?
Yeah, I think I do think that the whole asking for feedback, I think sometimes when people do that, I think the people that is asking, can I have feedback? The other person has a look of fear in their face from previous experience of even my own self. Like when I used to ask for feedback, I would get, oh, no, but everything's brilliant.
Right. How am I doing? Oh, you're great. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. As in, oh my God, like where is this conversation going to lead to? It's this kind of fear of, well, it's nearly pitched still as a negative. If we're talking feedback, it must be a negative place or it's not that, if we're saying you done well, we don't actually do that in a feedback way. We go, oh, you're doing really well. And that's the end of it. Whereas we should be putting our feedback and giving it, well, why did you do well? Well, what did you do? How did you implement it? And I think, for me, I still see that with managers. And it goes back to what you said there. I think in retail, especially, Jim, and this is what I've seen through the past couple of years, and it might be different, it's probably different in your area, but in retail, in order for you to progress in your pay scale, you need to move up. Okay. Yeah. So what ends up happening is people get promoted because they're a good worker. Not necessarily do they have the people skills to manage, but they're a good worker. So she's really, really good. She stays behind. She gets all the work done. She does this, and this. Her KPIs are really good. Her individual KPIs are good. Okay. But now we're going to promote her to manage a team. And now she's to manage the team and their KPIs. Okay. So that's very different to them managing themselves. Now they have to manage other people, and they're not being given the training. They're being thrown into the job because you know what, that line manager, they're performing really well in the role. What we're not realizing is it's for a staff member to be well in the role, that doesn't mean that they're ready or they have the people skills to move into that manager position. And historically, that's always been the case in that industry, that you promote because you're a good worker. And that's where what ends up happening is that person gets promoted. They don't have the capability or the competence to actually, do well in the role. And they either get really demotivated and they leave because the pressure is too much for them, or they stay in the role and they're firefighting.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what ends up happening.
And so you're absolutely right. There's, from a manager perspective versus a doer perspective,
yes,
two very different skill sets. And there are actually three levels. If you look at, I was speaking to the head HR person in one of these organizations, he likes to teach people there are three. It's one, you've got you're an individual contributor. Mm-hmm. Two is you've got a team mentality. So how are you making the people around you better, which is ultimately what management is all about, right? Your focus is on making them better. When you get people who are really good at sales, really good at these KPIs, they'll just say, oh, I'll just do it. I know how to do it better. That's not managing people in the right way. You're taking too much on. So many people fail that way. And then above that, you've got an enterprise view, which is beyond the store, beyond the organization, looking out across the industry. And so those are the three levels that people need to focus on. And when we're looking for that feedback to say, look, I want to be a manager, I want to run a store, I want to run whatever kind of group, in order to get that feedback, we have to express that desire so that people know the feedback to give you. And so you say, look, manager, I really, in the next couple of years, I'd like to move up into this kind of role of managing this segment of the business, whatever it is. I'd like to talk to you on a regular basis to make sure I can get the feedback on the skill sets I'm going to need to be really successful in that. And if you set it up properly, now granted, it should be the manager's job to be setting it up for you, but it doesn't always happen. You can set it up as well, where you start to articulate where you want to go so that you lay the proper foundation so that people are able to give you that feedback that you actually need so that you can learn that new skill set to managing a team versus just doing the KPI work and getting the normal day-to-day done.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you've said there a few times, where you've actually brought it back to the individual and have them take that ownership piece. Because I do see a lot of the time people get annoyed and they're sitting back and they're going, well, I'm waiting to be asked for the promotion. And I would say, why would you wait to be asked for the promotion? And many times where people they haven't gone for a promotion in an organization because they have that sense of entitlement, and because of whatever they've delivered, they feel, well, I've done so much that I need to now be asked for that promotion. But that's not the way things work, fairness and all of that and processes. So it's quite interesting that, I don't see enough of that, people taking accountability for their own career in the workplace. Right. I don't see that a lot.
And part of it is because it's how we were taught.
Yeah.
We're always told, if you work really hard, it'll pay off. You'll get your promotion. Work really hard and you'll get recognized for your work. It's a load of BS. It's not going to happen. Many people say, oh, I didn't want to put my name in the hat because I wanted to be humble. And I didn't want people to think I was too arrogant. And they find all of these reasons. But ultimately, if you don't do it, somebody else will, and they're going to take it. And it's the person who takes it that gets whatever. A person who raises their hand, puts their head up, says, I want that. They're the one that's going to get it. Most people aren't thinking about where you need to go. Most people aren't thinking about giving you a promotion because they're thinking about themselves and what their next role is. They don't have the time or capacity or anything to worry about the 15 people on their team and thinking about, are they getting, who's going to, how do I promote this person? How do I promote this person? It just doesn't happen that way. So you have to articulate and take whatever it is that you want. And that's not an arrogance thing. It's certainly a confidence thing, but to express a desire, give yourself the agency to say, I want something. And starting that conversation to say, how do I get it? And using your manager as one tool to get to that next level. That's one person who can give you feedback, who could potentially put a good buzz in somebody else's ear. Your manager is a utensil for you. Yeah. And that person should be helping you get to whatever it is, but you ultimately have to dictate where it is that you want to go.
Yeah, definitely. And we would always say, anywhere I've worked, I would have never chose a company. I would always choose the managers I'm going to be working with, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to give me that promotion. They're the ones that are going to make that environment. And if I do need support, that's who I'm going to need. It's that personality piece for me anyways, as an individual. And going back to what you said there, which I thought was great, was around, they are the representation of the organization. That manager that you said there a while ago, they are that whole organization to that individual. And it goes back to, I'm a parent, you're a parent. Our mums and dads were growing up, they're our whole world. Yeah, they're our world view. And we go into the workplace, we have that one or two line manager. They are that company. They are that kind of worldview piece that we have. And I suppose people that are in manager positions at the moment in retail, how do they kind of get people I suppose, motivated, or how do they get that kind of that buy-in? Do you think that they can do it on that level where it's maybe a very large organization, but they want to retain their team, and they could be running a small business, and what could they implement to really give, as you said there, that micro support on the individual, maybe having conversations with them, as you said, around, where they want to go. It was what you said there. I just actually, a thought entered my head. I worked with someone, and I don't know, is this applicable? I worked many years ago, and I couldn't give the person a pay rise. Okay, we just didn't have the budget at the time. They were in college and they were studying visual merchandising. They wanted to do visual merchandising, the windows, all of that sort of thing. And I said to them, I can't give you a pay rise, but I know you're doing this in university and this is a part-time gig. But what I can do is I can actually send you to different sites around Ireland whereby you're doing these window dressings. So that will build into your portfolio for your degree, and will also give you that on-site experience that you can put that into your CV then as well when you move on. And they stayed with me because I offered them something that was of benefit to them. It wasn't the money, but it was something that was helping them, towards their future, really, their future career. And it was, again, having a conversation with them and going, right, what can I give them? Because as you said there, it's about being that utensil. It's about, well, what can they get? It's not just, there used to be a thing of, well, you go to work and aren't you lucky you have a job? So in Ireland years ago, my parents used to say to me, I'd be saying, oh, just not enjoying this, or it's not going the way I want it. And they would immediately say, you're so lucky to have a job, and obviously I was born in in the 80s, so they're kind of going, Louise, like, they went through that whole recession, we ended up moving to the UK at one point, but they have this mentality whereby, you should be lucky you have a job. And I'm kind of going, oh my God, I can't hear this anymore. It's not just about getting paid, it's more than that. Life is more than about that, But yeah, I was just thinking, is it things like that people could do to get that buy-in, or that kind of that relationship thing going, do you think?
Yeah, it's, one of the things I learned when I left corporate, and I wish I'd learned way earlier, was that there are no rules. Right? There are no rules in the way that things are supposed to be. You can ultimately create and dictate whatever it is that you want to do. To get the feedback and buy-in from your teams, I would say the first thing you have to do is create the foundation so that a conversation can happen. And what I mean by that is, if you're managing 15 people, recognize, one, that you're in a position of power over these people. So you actually have to do the work to get them to share and open up what their hopes and desires are. People are intimidated by it. So in order to do that, it's more than just an annual review of how they're doing. It's an ongoing, maybe quarterly conversation with everybody, saying, and it may not just be to give feedback. It may just be, hey, each quarter I want to talk to everybody about what's going on, what can I do to help, what's great in your job, what's not, and come up with maybe 4 or 5 questions on your own that you can really ask them to get them to engage. And plenty of them are online. If you Google, you could find plenty of questions to say, how do you get people to talk about what it is that they want to do within the organization? But you have to be sincere about it. This can't just be a check the box thing. Yeah. You actually have to sit and talk to them and listen. You don't have to do all kinds of things and solve all their problems. It's more about starting the conversation and having it evolve over time so that you can co-create whatever that person wants to do next. Because ultimately, as your manager, you're teaching them how to ask these questions. You are a utensil for that person. So you're almost teaching them how to just use you a little bit, but then also go off on their own to dictate whatever it is that they want to do. And so that's, from a psychological safety perspective, when we talk about psychological safety, a lot of people just, they roll their eyes because it sounds so soft, but it's a legitimate aspect of managing people. And it's giving them a voice and allowing them to articulate what it is without a fear of, being embarrassed or humiliated or whatever it is. I want to run this business one day. Let them say that. That's fantastic. You want that person on your team because they're going to be a learner. And how do you ask them what they're learning and ask them how they're developing? People get excited when they're learning something new. And when they're able to articulate things and say things, that's going to make them do it. 99% of the advice we get from other people, we don't take it because it's not for us. It's disingenuous. But when we articulate that advice and say it for ourselves, all of a sudden we're much more excited about doing something and we're willing to accept it.
Definitely. And I think that's where the coaching comes in, and those kind of conversations where they're not being led by that manager. We're not looking for something. We're not looking to hear. I think sometimes we have conversations and we're looking to hear something that we want to hear, instead of really seeing where are they at in this process and meeting them where they're at right now in that moment in time. And I definitely think, I worked with a lot of places where people used to be afraid of the annual appraisal because it was all a scoring system. It was, you'd see a couple of weeks before the appraisal, people will be panicking. They'd be looking at their KPIs and they'd be biting their nails, and that you could see the look at, and it was the way it was structured in the organization. It wasn't a real measurement tool because it was, we're going to measure this aspect, but a lot of the time it doesn't measure the invisibles, the attitudes and the behaviors. I don't see enough of that, do they, when we launch new initiative, do they really help support implementing that in the business? Do we give people kudos for that? And if someone is sick and they're coming in and covering, do we give them kudos for being flexible, for supporting their colleagues that are maybe out sick or something has happened? Those people that go around and they're, as I say, they're the unseen leaders where they get everyone together and pumped. Do we give them kudos for that, or do we just look at the metrics? And a lot of the time I used to see some of the people that weren't delivering the best KPIs, but they were really, really great at getting the team when they were having a down day, they'd bring them up. So you wouldn't see the KPIs, but if you watched them and observed them, they were doing a lot more than that. They were getting those high achievers to actually go above and beyond. So I think those are the kind of things that we don't see enough of. And touching around psychological safety, in your book is around change and adapting change. Can you talk a little bit about your book and I suppose where it came from? Where was the motivation behind even starting it?
Yeah, it's called Adapting in Motion, Finding Your Place in the New Economy. It's ultimately what it became was a book on how do you manage change when you don't know what change is coming, right? Change happens so quickly that if you're in a reactive state, you're just not going to survive, right? And you're not going to evolve as quickly as possible. And when I think about the pandemic hitting, companies that were ready for online shopping and everything else skyrocketed, and the ones who were trying to struggle to get it probably aren't in business anymore. So how do you get people ready to adapt to change when they don't know what change is coming? And so the impetus for writing it, I always wanted to write a book, and I was traveling so much, probably about 10 years ago. And I just started writing on the plane and writing ideas. And once the pandemic hit, I finally said, I'm going to sit down and actually just do it. And so got up at 3 every morning and just wrote. And that's what it came into. And so it was very prescient because it was the middle of the pandemic, adapting to change. And so it was all of the things that I wish I had known years ago, back when I was in corporate. And if I had a coach back in corporate, if I had done all of these things back in corporate, I probably would have taken a very different path potentially. But there were just a lot of things. It was almost cathartic for me, almost teaching myself, this is what you need to do in order to adapt to change.
And is it based on your own experiences, Jim, what you've kind of gone through and how you've maybe adapted and the learnings you've taken both in your career in corporate and coaching as well?
Yeah, it's, when we take a look at any kind of change, it's an arc. And so it starts with awareness. What change is happening? And you're aware that things are happening too quickly. Your business can't respond quickly enough. Your team's not responding quickly enough. And we know technology is evolving faster than we can, really keep up. So all of these things, that's fine. That's external, kind of like what we were talking before. You can't adapt that. So how do you get ready to adapt to those types of things? So the next step from awareness, you go to preparation. And how do you prepare yourself? Everything from the food you're eating affects the way that you think, to your social networks are getting you to where you need to go. So from a physical, mental, social standpoint, financial standpoint, how are you preparing yourself for whatever change is coming down the pike? And from there, once you feel like you've got almost a grid of preparation, you then focus on learning. what does humility actually look like? And how do you become a learner? And how do you ask really, really good questions? Because the greatest leaders that I know are the ones who can ask really, really good questions, and they recognize their limits of what they know and where to go, and who are the people who are going to help them get to whatever that next level is. And beyond learning then is you're making good decisions. It's wisdom. I've learned a lot. I've prepared appropriately. These are the best decisions I can make in the moment. And it's this ongoing process of awareness, preparing, learning, and wisdom. Do it again, do it again, do it again. And that's your cycle to respond to change.
Really interesting. Yeah, definitely the awareness piece is something that even I've gone into my own business full time, and it's a huge journey. I reflective practice a lot. I think we can learn a lot from ourselves if we look a little bit within where our thoughts are coming from, and how they're manifesting in different parts of the day in our life. So fast forward, so you've come out of your corporate career, and what would you say was the biggest hurdle, just for people listening in, maybe that's because a lot of people, obviously we have the great resignation that's happening, and a lot of people are unhappy in their jobs, and they want to maybe move, and they're in that transition period where they're maybe figuring out that the job they were in paid the bills, but it just didn't necessarily fulfill them. It didn't necessarily maybe meet their purpose in life, or they're feeling very conflicted in that way. What would you say would be your kind of looking back, right? That's kind of where I transitioned then. What was going through your head, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was, so my career was primarily in the financial industry, and full of burnout. I was doing PR for the banks during the financial crisis. I was doing executive communications, business strategy, and it was a lot of work. And I didn't want to do it. I could do the work. I was really good at the work, but I had no vision. I couldn't see where it was that I actually wanted to go. And I remember one of my bosses looking at me saying, "You could run any business at this bank. Tell me what it is and you can have it." And I said, I don't want to do it. It's just not what I want to do. So when I left and started my business, and I had a plan before I left, I went, got certified at Columbia from being a coach. And I went to a coach to talk about putting together a business plan and all of that. The first thing I had to learn was unlearning all of the things at corporate, because it was just bad behaviors in corporate in general. And a lot of the assumptions that we make, especially after a 20-year career, you just sit there and you say, why am I doing things this way? And really starting to question that. I still, to this day, that was 8 years ago. I still, to this day, sometimes think about going back to corporate because the money's so good. Right? You could go back to corporate and there you still have to pay bills. And there is a lot of work that comes to being an entrepreneur. You have to do everything. You have to do marketing. You have to do administrative. You have to deliver the product. You have to sell the product. You have to do all of these. So I would almost say in some respects, corporate's more easy, but you're also giving up a portion of yourself potentially to get that ease in the money. And so what's that balance? And everybody's different. Some people prefer one thing versus the other. But that's, the big change is you have to do everything, unlearn what you learned in corporate. And it's, enjoy the ride. It's difficult, but it's fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think if it's something, I think it's about, well, for me anyways, it mightn't be with everyone else. It's about feeling I'm actually making a difference in the world. That was always my thing within me, was that if I feel I'm not making a difference in people's lives, or I feel, I'm not going to be here forever. I want to have a life that I can stand back. If I don't have a Lamborghini in the driveway, if I don't have a big, huge mansion, is it really going to impact me on a day-to-day basis? Freaking not, but that whole piece of connection with people and helping them and their journey is something that always gave me joy within myself. And I think that was the deciding factor for me personally, was having that autonomy, like you talked there about, and control, and to control my own life and the outputs that it's going to have. Definitely.
Yeah. And when you sit, and it's ultimately what you're looking for is perspective. I think when you're looking to make a change for that is, are you okay giving up the paycheck? But most of your social circle is probably in a similar tax bracket as what you are, right? So are you okay stepping back from that, at least for a little while? But also recognize, when I started, I guess it was 8 years ago, I was in my mid to late 30s. I had another 30 years of working. There was no way I was going to do that at a bank. There was just no way I was going to spend another 20, 30 years. And I think a lot of people with the Great Resignation are starting to recognize that. I also see a lot of people going back to corporate because they made the effort and they say, you know what, this actually isn't what I thought it was going to be. And they're going back. So, but in a matter of perspective, do you want to spend the next 20, 30 years? If it is going to be in corporate, that's fine. You could do that. But when you figure out the perspective of what it is you actually want, is corporate a tool to get you to do whatever it is, to take your kids on vacation every year? Fine. Okay. If you have a desire to get your kids into college and do all that stuff, that paycheck is helping you do that. And we have to step back and say, it's not just a job, it's also funding whatever it is that I actually want to do with my life. Then that's fine. And for many people that works, and people are starting to create their boundaries and putting their work in that type of place to say, look, you're a utensil. I'm happy to give you the work. I'm happy to give you some time, but I'm not going to give you my weekends because that's going back to my family and everything else. So people are able to get that perspective without leaving corporate, but understand what's actually really, really important to them.
Yeah, I think what has been great around the COVID and the resignation, all of that, I think people are finally starting to look for more from their employers. People are finally starting to ask for more, and we're not just taking whatever is being given to us from that. And I think, my hope would be that more organizations are, involving those people a lot more in those decisions, that it's not just at a board level, that we're actually looking at people outside of that boardroom to get involved in that decision making process, or even just to have feedback around the decisions they're making, because I think it really makes a difference in the culture in an organization when you have different departments at different levels, and very much in especially in the industry I've been in, you have this person, it's very much at a whatever level of seniority you are, that's how loud your voice is going to be heard, and I would love to see that flipped more around, whereby we have that upside down triangle where we're really looking from the bottom up, and we're getting more people, and because we're really then seeing how things are being implemented on a day-to-day basis, not just moving on to the next. We buy in stock, we buy stuff, we ship it off, nobody ever hears of it again because now we're on to the next new project, and we never really analyze what the implementation has happened and what the outcome of that might have been. So I really hope with this recession thing that we're really looking for innovation within companies at a lower level, and we're looking for that entrepreneurship that everyone has within themselves, but tapping into that more with the individuals in that workplace, instead of depending on where your ranking is.
Yeah, it's and I a lot of the companies I'm working with now are starting to embrace that, where they're saying, we have employees, but it's almost like entrepreneurs in residence. And when you're working from home or working virtually, it's a whole new skill set to articulate your value. And many people are having a hard time articulating their value. And that's part of the entrepreneurship of working from home and saying, this is what I'm doing for the organization. This is what warrants my $150,000, $200,000 paycheck. And having people able to do that. I think that's going to be a future of work for a lot of organizations, to say, we don't hire just employees, we're hiring entrepreneurs with specialties, and this is how they're going to move around the organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's that, to me, is going to be so key with where things are going. We're going to hire, so you're really good, could be, I don't know, you're a manager, but you're really, really good on social media. So, we're going to put you in that position. But, if you want to go into that social media, we're really tapping into people's individual talents, as opposed to, this is the job spec, this is how you're going to do, instead of putting people into boxes, that we break that box down a little bit and we look at, right, what is their skill set and how best can we utilize that in our business, and to really tap into that. Because I think for a long time we didn't do that. It was, we want, this is what we wanted, we don't want to hear about anything else, and because this is the way it is, this is the box you're going to stay in. So I think that entrepreneurship piece will really, I think it'll bring organizations to another level.
And it's going to be a whole new skill set for people to learn. I mean, it's not even going to be dictating based on skill set. You're going to move the dictation out of it and say, this is the project and direction we're going into, and have people pitch to say, I want to be on that project. I want to be on that project. I want to be the accountant for that project. I want to be the marketer for that project. And now all of a sudden you really have to learn how to articulate your value. And it's a completely new way to work and way to think about going into the office.
Yeah, it's more facilitative as opposed to prescriptive. Definitely. Right. Yeah, with that. I've loved talking to you, Jim. You're really interesting. You've so many different perspectives and views on all of this, and it's really interesting to see your take on it, because just even from a learning and development, I can hear from all the different things, the stories that you have. It's really, really interesting. So I really appreciate you coming on this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Jim. Please check out Jim Frawley and check out his book. It's absolutely amazing. And his podcast is fantastic. And Bellwether, Jim, you're absolutely amazing. And thank you for coming on this morning. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.